I never imagined my quiet life in Pine Ridge Estates would turn into a 3-month nightmare of stolen electricity, confrontations, and ultimately lead to my entitled neighbor facing a $10,000 fine for utility theft. But sometimes the most outrageous stories happen in the most ordinary places, and my tale of a Tesla-driving neighbor who thought she could help herself to my property is proof of that. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Living in Pine Ridge Estates had always been a source of pride. For me, located in the rolling hills of western Connecticut, our neighborhood represents that sweet spot between luxury and modesty, where successful professionals and young families create a vibrant community without the pretension of more. Upscale areas. My home, a charming colonial revival with sage green shutters and a wraparound porch, sits on a corner lot that I purchased 5 years ago after landing my dream job at a renewable energy consulting firm. The property's unique layout was what initially caught my eye. While most homes in Pine Ridge have traditional separate driveways, my house shares a unique Y-shaped driveway configuration with my neighbor's property, a quirk from when both lots were originally part of a larger estate in the 1950s. The previous neighbors, an elderly couple named the Hendersons, were a joy to live beside. We had a comfortable understanding about the shared space, often chatting over coffee on Sunday mornings about maintaining our properties and keeping the historic charm of the neighborhood intact. The driveway setup had never been an issue until 3 months ago. That's when Alexandria Watson moved in next door after the Hendersons relocated to Florida to be closer to their grandchildren. At first, Alexandria, or Alex, as she insisted on being called, seemed like she'd fit right into our community. She was a successful real estate agent in her mid-30s, drove a brand new Tesla Model Y, which she never failed to mention in conversation, and spoke enthusiastically about her plans to modernize her historic home while keeping its character. My first real interaction with Alex was pleasant enough. It was a crisp autumn morning, and I was raking leaves when she approached me with a designer coffee cup in hand. She complimented my gardening efforts and asked about the neighborhood. We chatted about local restaurants, and she mentioned how the area's green initiatives aligned perfectly with her environmental values, something she demonstrated by pointing to her Tesla, which was parked prominently in the shared driveway. The Y-shaped driveway had worked perfectly with the Hendersons because we'd established clear boundaries and communication. Each of us had our own side, and we'd always discuss any changes or maintenance needed. But I noticed Alex had a different approach from day one. She would park her Tesla wherever was most convenient for her, sometimes blocking my access with the excuse that she needed to charge it, though she hadn't installed a charging station yet. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs. In those first few weeks, the way she casually dismissed my suggestions about driveway etiquette, her frequent comments about how neighbors should share everything, and her peculiar interest in my recently installed Level 2 EV charger. I had invested in the charger when I purchased my own electric vehicle, a modest Chevrolet Bolt, as part of my commitment to sustainable living. If only I had known then what I know now, that my well-meaning investment in green technology would lead to months of frustration, surveillance cameras, police reports, and ultimately a shocking discovery that would result in my neighbor facing thousands in fines and legal consequences. But that's getting ahead of the story. To understand how a seemingly normal neighbor turned into an entitled electricity thief, we need to go back to where the real trouble began. The first sign that Alex's entitlement went beyond casual inconvenience came during a neighborhood block party in late September. As residents gathered on our shared lawns, enjoying potluck dishes and autumn weather, Alex commanded attention with stories of her recent real estate successes and her Tesla's latest software updates. Between sips of expensive wine, she complained about the horrible inconvenience of having to drive to public charging stations since moving in. "I just can't believe this neighborhood doesn't have a communal charging station," she announced to anyone within earshot. "It's 2025. We should be more progressive." Her gaze lingered meaningfully on my level 2 charger, visible from where we stood. Several neighbors shifted uncomfortably, especially when she added, "I mean, some people here already have chargers. Sharing is caring, right?" I chose to bite my tongue that evening, but her words stuck with me. The way she emphasized sharing made me uneasy, especially given her increasing tendency to park her Tesla as close to my side of the driveway as possible. What I didn't know then was that she was already formulating plans to help herself to my electricity. The following week, I noticed small changes in my daily routine. My Chevy Bolt, which I typically plugged in overnight, wasn't reaching full charge by morning. At first, I attributed it to colder weather affecting the battery, but something felt off. My electricity bill also showed an unusual spike, nearly double my typical usage. As someone who meticulously tracks my energy consumption for both professional and personal reasons, this anomaly stood out. One evening, while reviewing my Smart Chargers app data, I noticed something peculiar. The charging log showed activity during times when my car wasn't even home. Concerned, I started paying closer attention to my charger's usage patterns. The data revealed regular charging sessions between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m., times when I was sound asleep. My suspicions grew when I observed Alex's increasingly erratic parking habits. She began positioning her Tesla in ways that made it difficult for me to access my charger, always with a ready excuse about just needing to move it in a minute, or claiming she was waiting for a delivery. The pattern was subtle but consistent. Her car would be parked awkwardly close to my charger late at night, but by morning it would be moved to her side of the driveway. The situation came to a head one chilly October morning when I was preparing for an important client meeting. I'd left my Bolt plugged in overnight, knowing I'd need a full charge for the commute to Hartford. But when I went to unplug my car at 7 a.m., I found it had only charged to 30%. Worse yet, I discovered why. My charging cable was plugged into Alex's Tesla, which was parked in her usual spot near my charger. My heart raced as I stood there, staring at the brazen theft in broad daylight. The charging cable, my charging cable, stretched across the small gap between our parking spaces, feeding electricity from my charger into her Tesla. She hadn't even tried to hide it. The entitlement was staggering. Just as I was documenting the situation with photos on my phone, Alex emerged from her house, travel mug in hand, dressed in a designer suit. She walked to her car as if nothing was amiss, offering a casual, "Good morning," with a smile that suggested she saw nothing wrong with the situation. "Alex," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady, "why is my charger plugged into your car?" She barely paused as she opened her car door. "Oh, I hope you don't mind. I had an early showing this morning and really needed the charge. The public stations are so inconvenient, and since we're neighbors..." She trailed off with a wave of her hand, as if that explained everything. "This is not okay," I stated firmly. "You can't just use my charger without asking. It's connected to my electricity bill, and I need it for my own car." Her expression shifted, the friendly neighbor facade cracking slightly. "Come on, it's not a big deal. We share a driveway anyway, and it's just a little electricity. Don't be so uptight about it." With that, she unplugged the cable, letting it drop to the ground rather than returning it to its holder, and slipped into her Tesla. As I watched her drive away, I realized this wasn't going to be a simple neighborly disagreement. Alex had crossed a line, and her dismissive attitude suggested she didn't see anything wrong with taking what wasn't hers. I needed to take action before this situation escalated further, but I had no idea just how complicated things were about to become. After that morning confrontation, I decided to take a methodical approach to addressing the situation. As a consultant who handles complex energy projects, I knew the importance of documenting everything. I began keeping a detailed log of all charging activities, complete with timestamps and photographs. I also installed a smart meter specifically for my EV charger to track exact usage patterns and electricity consumption. My first step was to email Alex formally, hoping to establish a clear paper trail. I wrote a professional message outlining my concerns about the unauthorized use of my charging equipment and included copies of the relevant sections from our Homeowners Association bylaws about personal property rights. I even offered to help her research local electricians who could install her own charging station. The casual dismissal of my property rights was frustrating enough, but what really concerned me was the winky emoji she'd added, as if we were sharing some kind of inside joke rather than discussing theft of utilities. I decided to monitor the situation more closely, setting up notifications from my Smart Chargers app to alert me of any charging activity. Over the next week, the pattern became clear. Alex would wait until around midnight, when she assumed I was asleep, to unplug my car if it was charging and connect her Tesla instead. She'd then move her car early in the morning, usually around 5 a.m., probably thinking I wouldn't notice. But my app logged everything: duration, power consumption, and timing of each charging session. The most alarming discovery came when I reviewed my electricity bills more carefully. By calculating the additional power consumption from these unauthorized charging sessions, I estimated Alex had stolen nearly $400 worth of electricity in just 1 month. This wasn't just about the money. It was about the principle and her growing boldness in taking what wasn't hers. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. One particularly cold morning, I decided to confront her again, this time with evidence in hand. I caught her just as she was unplugging her Tesla at dawn, fog still clinging to the driveway. "Alex, we need to talk about this," I said, holding up my phone with the charging logs displayed. "I have records of every time you've used my charger without permission." She straightened up, brushing her designer coat with manicured hands. "Oh, please, are you really going to nickel and dime me over a few kilowatt hours? This is what's wrong with society. Everyone's so possessive about everything. In Europe, neighbors share resources all the time. It's called being part of a community." "This isn't about community," I countered, trying to remain calm. "It's about respect for private property. You're stealing electricity that I pay for, and it's affecting my ability to charge my own car." Alex's face hardened. "Stealing is such an ugly word. I prefer to think of it as environmental resource sharing. Besides," she added with a smirk, "prove it was me. Maybe your charger is just malfunctioning. Those things can be so unreliable." As she drove away, her Tesla silent but her message loud and clear, I realized the situation was worse than I'd thought. Not only was she unapologetic about taking my electricity, but she was now suggesting I couldn't prove it was her. Her attitude had shifted from casual entitlement to active defiance. That evening, I noticed something else concerning. While reviewing security footage from my doorbell camera, I saw Alex showing another Tesla owner from a few streets over how to access my charger. They were laughing and chatting as if they were sharing a neighborhood secret, completely dismissive of the fact that they were essentially planning organized theft. It was becoming clear that Alex wasn't just an entitled neighbor. She was actively creating a problem that could spiral out of control. If she was sharing access to my charger with others, my electricity bills could skyrocket even further. More importantly, unauthorized use of my charging equipment could potentially damage it or void its warranty. I spent that night researching my options, looking into everything from legal precedents about utility theft to the specific regulations governing EV charging equipment in our state. What I found would prove crucial in the weeks to come, but at that moment I had no idea just how much I would need this information. The situation escalated dramatically one snowy Thursday evening in early November. I had an important client presentation the next morning in Boston, requiring an early departure, and consequently, a fully charged car. I'd carefully timed my charging schedule, plugging in my Bolt at 6 p.m. to ensure it would be ready for my 5 a.m. departure. Around midnight, my smart charger app buzzed with an alert. Initially, I tried to ignore it, assuming it was just a routine notification, but something made me check. Perhaps it was intuition, or maybe I'd grown paranoid after weeks of dealing with Alex's theft. To my horror, the app showed my charging session had been interrupted and a new one had begun. Looking through my bedroom window, I could see Alex's Tesla parked in its usual spot near my charger, the charging cable's LED indicator glowing in the darkness. What made this particularly egregious was that she knew about my early morning commitments. I'd mentioned the Boston trip during a recent HOA meeting, where she'd sat 2 seats away from me. Throwing on a coat over my pajamas, I headed outside, into the bitter cold. The snow was falling heavily now, and my security light cast long shadows across the driveway. As I approached her car, I noticed something that made my blood boil. She'd not only unplugged my car, but had tossed my charging cable carelessly into a slushy puddle, where it was now partially frozen. This was the last straw. I marched to her front door and rang the doorbell repeatedly. After what seemed like an eternity, Alex appeared, wearing silk pajamas and an annoyed expression. Before she could speak, I cut in. "You need to unplug your car right now. I have an important meeting in Boston tomorrow, and I need my car charged." "Oh my God, you're being so dramatic," she rolled her eyes. "Your little Bolt doesn't need nearly as much charge as my Tesla. I have showings all day tomorrow too, No, can't you just use a public charger on your way?" "That's not the point," I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. "This is my charger, connected to my electricity, and you've not only stolen it again, but damaged my property." I pointed to the cable lying in the slush. Alex's demeanor changed suddenly, her casual dismissiveness morphing into something harder. "You know what? I've had enough of your attitude. This is a shared driveway, and you're being ridiculous about this whole thing. If you're so worried about your precious electricity, maybe we should get the HOA involved. I'm sure they'd love to hear about how you're refusing to share community resources." "Community resources?" I was incredulous. "This is private property that I paid for and maintain. And yes, let's get the HOA involved. I'm sure they'd be very interested in seeing my documentation of your systematic theft." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "Documentation? Please, it's your word against mine. And trust me, I have a lot more influence in this neighborhood than you do. I've sold half these houses to their current owners. Who do you think they'll believe?" As we stood there in the snowy darkness, I realized this confrontation had shifted. Something fundamental in our conflict. This wasn't just about unauthorized charging anymore. This was about power, influence, and Alex's belief that she was somehow above the rules that governed the rest of us. After a tense moment, she turned and went back inside without another word, leaving her Tesla still connected to my charger. I stood there in the snow, watching my breath cloud in the frigid air, knowing that this was a turning point. The next morning, I found my charging cable unplugged and thrown aside again, covered in a fresh layer of snow. My car had only charged to 40%, barely enough to make it to Boston. I had to drive significantly under the speed limit to conserve power and stop at a public charging station along the way, making me late for my presentation. As I sat in that charging station at 5:30 a.m., watching the batteries slowly fill while my client meeting time approached, I made a decision. This wasn't just about inconvenience anymore. Alex's actions were actively affecting my livelihood. That evening, after returning from Boston, I noticed something else concerning. While reviewing my security footage, I saw that Alex had hosted what appeared to be an impromptu EV charging party while I was away. 3 different Teslas had cycled through my charger throughout the day, their owners chatting and laughing as they helped themselves to my electricity. One of them even took photos, presumably to share the location with others. The footage showed Alex gesturing to my charger like a proud host showing off an amenity, completely unconcerned about the fact that she was facilitating group theft. This wasn't just opportunistic anymore. She was systematically sharing access to my property with others, creating a potential liability nightmare. The next morning, I decided it was time to take official action. My first step was to contact our homeowners association. I spent several hours compiling a comprehensive report, complete with timestamps, photographs, video footage, and detailed calculations of the stolen electricity based on my smart chargers data and Tesla's known charging rates. I scheduled a meeting with Marcus Thompson, our HOA president, a retired judge who prided himself on running the association with fairness and precision. As I sat in his home office, surrounded by legal books and family photos, I carefully laid out my case. Mr. Thompson, over the past 6 weeks, I've documented unauthorized use of my charging equipment totaling approximately $750 in stolen electricity, I explained, sliding across a folder containing my evidence. But it's not just about the money. Ms. Watson is creating a liability issue by sharing access to my charging equipment with other unauthorized users. Marcus reviewed the documentation thoughtfully, his expression growing more concerned as he examined the nighttime security footage and charging logs. "This is quite troubling," he said, adjusting his reading glasses, "especially the pattern of deliberate late-night access and the incident affecting your business trip. Have you contacted the police?" "I wanted to start through proper channels, with the HOA first," I replied. "I have all the necessary documentation if we need to escalate, but I hoped we could resolve this internally." He nodded approvingly at my diplomatic approach. "Let me speak with her first. We'll need to call a special hearing of the board to address this formally. In the meantime, I suggest you send her a certified letter demanding she cease using your charging equipment immediately." That afternoon, I drafted the letter with input from a lawyer friend who specialized in property disputes. The language was clear and firm, outlining the unauthorized use, the documented damages, and the potential legal consequences if the behavior continued. I sent it via certified mail, requiring a signature for delivery. While waiting for the HOA process to unfold, I installed additional security cameras specifically focused on my charging equipment and the shared driveway area. I also added motion-activated lights and warning signs stating private charging equipment, unauthorized use prohibited, and area under 24/7 video surveillance. Alex's response to the certified letter came swiftly and unexpectedly. Instead of backing down, she escalated the situation by filing a counter-complaint with the HOA. Her claim was bizarre. She alleged that my charging equipment was an unauthorized modification to the shared driveway and demanded its removal. Her complaint read like a masterpiece of entitled logic. The installation of private charging equipment in a shared space creates an unfair advantage and diminishes property values for non-users. As a real estate professional, I can attest that such selective amenities create discord in the community. The charger should either be removed or designated as a shared resource. The day after filing her complaint, Alex seemed to take particular pleasure in parking her Tesla deliberately close to my charger, making it difficult for me to access it. She'd wave cheerfully whenever she saw me, as if daring me to say something. Her behavior had shifted from secretive nighttime theft to bold daylight provocation. The situation became even more tense when she began spreading rumors among neighbors. I overheard her at the local coffee shop telling another resident, "Can you believe someone would install a charger in a shared driveway and then refuse to let neighbors use it? It's so selfish. This is supposed to be an eco-friendly community." Her campaign to paint me as the villain was clever but transparent. She'd positioned herself as an environmental advocate, fighting against selfish resource hoarding, completely ignoring the fact that she was essentially stealing utilities she hadn't paid for. The breaking point came when she hosted a small gathering of local real estate agents in her backyard. Through my security cameras, I could hear her giving them a tour of the property. "And this is the shared charging station I was telling you about. It's perfect for clients who want green amenities. Just don't mention it to the grumpy neighbor who thinks they own it." I watched in disbelief as she actually demonstrated to her colleagues how to access my charger, presenting it as a selling point for potential buyers. She was not only continuing to steal electricity, but was now using my private property as a marketing tool for her real estate business. That evening, I received an email from Marcus Thompson. The HOA board had reviewed both my documentation and Alex's counter-complaint, and they'd scheduled an emergency hearing for the following week. "Both parties will have an opportunity to present their case," the email stated. "Given the serious nature of the allegations, we recommend bringing any additional evidence you may have gathered since your initial report." As I prepared for the hearing, I had no idea that Alex's response to this official proceeding would push her behavior from mere entitlement to something far more serious and ultimately lead to consequences she never anticipated. In the days leading up to the HOA hearing, the situation with Alex deteriorated rapidly. Rather than laying low or attempting to make amends, she seemed emboldened by the upcoming proceedings. Her behavior shifted from passive-aggressive to openly hostile, as if she was determined to prove she could do whatever she wanted with my property. The first sign of escalation came when she began organizing what she called green energy meetups in her driveway. These weren't just casual gatherings, they were structured events where she invited other Tesla owners from neighboring communities to discuss shared sustainable resources. My security cameras captured her giving tutorials on how to access my charger, complete with tips on the best times to use it without getting caught. "The trick is to charge between midnight and 5 a.m., I overheard her telling a group one evening. "The owner usually doesn't check the app during those hours. Just remember to move your car before they wake up." The group laughed, treating it like some clever life hack rather than organized theft. Her arrogance reached new heights when she actually created a digital calendar for her charging club members to coordinate their usage of my charger. I discovered this when one of my more conscientious neighbors, David from 2 doors down, forwarded me an invitation he'd received. The email included a Google Calendar link with time slots for community charging sessions, and even had the audacity to include best practices for using my equipment. The calendar was filled with scheduled charging times, each slot carefully arranged to minimize the chance of detection. Alex had essentially turned my private property into a communal charging station without my knowledge or consent, complete with an organized booking system. What made matters worse was the way she began manipulating the narrative in our community. At a neighborhood garden club meeting, which I usually attended but missed due to work, she apparently gave an impassioned speech about environmental equity and the importance of sharing green resources. According to my neighbor Grace, who was present, Alex painted herself as a champion of sustainable living, being oppressed by selfish property owners. "She made it sound like you were hoarding some kind of public utility," Grace told me over the fence. Several people actually seemed sympathetic to her position. She's quite convincing when she wants to be. The physical damage to my property also began to mount. One morning, I found my charging cable twisted and bent at an awkward angle, likely from someone trying to force it to reach their car parked too far away. Another time, the protective cover on the charging port was cracked, presumably from rough handling during one of the late-night charging sessions. My electricity bills continued to skyrocket. November's bill was nearly triple my usual usage, and December was looking even worse. I calculated that at the current rate, Alex and her charging club were costing me over $200 per week in stolen electricity, not counting the potential damage to my charging equipment. The security footage from this period told a disturbing story of escalating entitlement. On one particularly busy night, 3 different Teslas cycled through my charger, their owners chatting and laughing as they helped themselves to my electricity. They treated it like a social event, sometimes bringing coffee and snacks, completely unconcerned about the fact that they were stealing from a neighbor. Alex even began leaving passive-aggressive notes on my door when the charger was temporarily offline for maintenance. "Your community charging station seems to be malfunctioning," one note read. "Please fix it ASAP, as many of us rely on this shared resource." The sheer audacity of demanding service for equipment she was stealing left me speechless. The final straw came when she actually had the nerve to file a complaint with the local utility company, claiming that my shared charging station was experiencing technical issues. A confused utility worker showed up at my door one morning, explaining that he'd received a report about a malfunctioning public charging station at my address. When I explained that this was private property and showed him the documentation of Alex's ongoing theft, he was shocked. "Ma'am," he said, shaking his head, "this isn't just about unauthorized use anymore. Tampering with utility equipment and filing false reports can lead to serious legal consequences." His words gave me pause. Until then, I'd been focused on resolving this through the HOA, but Alex's actions were crossing into potentially criminal territory. As the hearing date approached, I realized I needed to be prepared for the possibility that HOA intervention alone might not be enough to stop her increasingly brazen behavior. With the HOA hearing approaching, I knew I needed to strengthen my case beyond just documentation of the theft. I spent a weekend creating a detailed analysis of the entire situation, approaching it with the same thoroughness I use in my energy consulting work. This wasn't just about proving Alex's theft anymore. It was about demonstrating the full scope of her organized scheme. I reached out to my friend Sarah, a forensic accountant, for help organizing the financial evidence. Together, we created a comprehensive spreadsheet tracking every unauthorized charging session, complete with timestamps, duration, and calculated power consumption. Using Tesla's published charging specifications, we could accurately estimate how much electricity Alex and her charging club had stolen. "Based on these numbers," Sarah said, reviewing the data, "they've taken approximately $2,800 worth of electricity over the past 3 months. But what's really interesting is the pattern." She pointed to a graph showing increasing usage over time. "This isn't opportunistic theft. It's systematic and growing." The data revealed something else concerning. By cross-referencing my security footage with the charging logs, we discovered that Alex had created a sophisticated rotation system for her charging club. Different Tesla owners were assigned specific time slots, with Alex collecting what appeared to be membership fees from some participants. This transformed the situation from simple utility theft into what could potentially be considered a criminal enterprise. I also consulted with Miguel, an electrical engineer who specializes in EV charging systems. He inspected my equipment and provided a professional assessment of the potential damage caused by unauthorized use. "These chargers aren't designed for this kind of shared usage," he explained, pointing out signs of wear. "The repeated plugging and unplugging, especially during cold weather, can damage the internal components. Plus, they're using it without proper training or care." Miguel's report detailed the risks of unauthorized use, including potential electrical hazards and fire risks. He estimated that the abuse had reduced my charger's lifespan by several years, and noted that any accidents resulting from unauthorized use could potentially make me liable as the equipment owner. I also discovered something disturbing while reviewing my security footage more carefully. On several occasions, Alex's charging club members had attempted to modify my charger's settings using a smartphone app. These unauthorized access attempts could have potentially damaged the equipment or created dangerous situations. To further document the scope of the problem, I set up a dedicated email address for neighbors to report any observations related to unauthorized charger use. The responses were illuminating. Several residents reported seeing Alex giving tours of my charging equipment to prospective homebuyers in the area. One neighbor even recorded a video of her describing it as a community amenity during an open house she was hosting. Mrs. Chen, who lived across the street, provided particularly valuable information. As a retiree who enjoyed tending to her garden late into the evening, she had witnessed numerous unauthorized charging sessions. "She has a whole system," Mrs. Chen told me. "Different cars come at different times, and she coordinates everything through her phone. Sometimes they leave money in her mailbox." This information suggested that Alex wasn't just stealing electricity. She was potentially profiting from providing access to my charger. I carefully documented Mrs. Chen's observations and added them to my growing file of evidence. I also began researching similar cases of utility theft involving electric vehicle chargers. While this was a relatively new type of crime, I found several precedents where unauthorized use of private charging equipment had resulted in significant legal consequences. One case in particular caught my attention. A California resident had been fined over $15,000 for operating an unauthorized charging ring using stolen electricity. To ensure all my evidence would be admissible in any potential legal proceedings, I consulted with a friend who worked as a paralegal. She helped me establish a proper chain of custody for all my digital evidence, including the security footage, charging logs, and financial records. We created backup copies of everything and had key documents notarized. The paralegal also suggested documenting the impact on my daily life and professional activities. I started keeping a detailed journal of every incident where Alex's theft had affected my ability to use my own charger, including the missed meeting in Boston and several other professional appointments that had been compromised by having an insufficiently charged vehicle. As the evidence mounted, it became clear that this wasn't just about one entitled neighbor stealing electricity. Alex had created an organized system of theft, potentially for profit, while deliberately undermining my property rights and manipulating community opinion. The question now was whether the HOA would recognize the severity of the situation, or if I would need to pursue more serious legal action. 2 days before the HOA hearing, an unexpected incident drastically changed the dynamics of the situation. I was working from home when I heard an unusual electrical buzzing sound coming from my charger. Looking out my home office window, I saw Alex's Tesla plugged in. Nothing unusual there, given her persistent theft. But something was clearly wrong. Sparks were visibly flying from the connection point. I immediately ran outside, grabbing my phone to call 911 on the way. The acrid smell of burning plastic filled the air as I approached. Alex was nowhere in sight, but I could see that someone had clearly tampered with the charger's interface panel. It was partially pried open, exposing internal wiring. Later investigation would reveal that one of her charging club members had attempted to bypass the charger's power-limiting features to achieve faster charging speeds. The fire department arrived within minutes, quickly disconnecting power to the entire charging system and securing the area. Chief Martinez, a veteran firefighter with experience handling electrical fires, took one look at the modified charger and shook his head. "This could have been catastrophic," he said, photographing the damage. "Whoever did this had no idea what they were playing with. You're lucky this didn't start a serious fire." The fire department's investigation revealed something even more disturbing. The tampering hadn't been a one-time event. There were signs of repeated attempts to modify the charger's settings. Someone had been systematically trying to override its safety features, likely to facilitate faster charging for multiple vehicles. While the firefighters were still on scene, Alex suddenly appeared, looking surprisingly unconcerned about the near disaster involving her car. Instead, she seemed more worried about the interruption to her charging schedule. "When will this be fixed?" she demanded, as if she had every right to expect continued access to my charger. "I have important showings today, and I need my car fully charged." Chief Martinez turned to her, his expression stern. "Ma'am, are you saying this is your vehicle connected to the damaged charging equipment?" When Alex nodded impatiently, he continued, "And do you have permission to use this private charging station?" Before she could respond with what would undoubtedly be another entitled explanation, I stepped forward with my documentation. "No, she doesn't. I own this charger, and I've repeatedly asked her to stop using it without authorization. I have extensive records of the theft." The chief's demeanor changed immediately. "Ms. Watson, tampering with electrical equipment and unauthorized use of private utilities is a serious offense. We'll need to include this in our official report." He turned to his team. "Document everything. This is now a potential crime scene." Alex's face went pale as she realized the situation had escalated beyond her control. "This is ridiculous," she sputtered. "It's just a charging station. I'm sure whoever touched it was just trying to make it more efficient for everyone's use." "There is no everyone's use," Chief Martinez replied firmly. "This is private property, and based on what I'm seeing, someone could have been seriously injured. The fire department will be filing a report with both the police and the electrical safety board." As if on cue, 2 police officers arrived to take statements. Officer Chen, who had responded to some of my previous complaints about Alex, immediately recognized the situation. "So it's escalated to tampering now," she noted, taking detailed notes as I explained the history of theft and unauthorized access. Officers interviewed several neighbors who had witnessed the incident. Mrs. Chen from across the street provided crucial information about the regular late-night charging sessions and the money changing hands. Mr. Peterson, a retired electrician who lived next door, described seeing someone working on the charger's panel the previous evening. Throughout all of this, Alex alternated between attempts to downplay the situation and increasingly desperate justifications. "Everyone shares charging stations in Europe," she insisted to anyone who would listen. "This is just American selfishness. We should be promoting green energy sharing." The officers were unimpressed by her arguments. "Ma'am," Officer Chen said firmly, "unauthorized modification of electrical equipment isn't sharing. It's vandalism and potentially criminal tampering. Given the history here, we're going to need you to come to the station to make a formal statement." As Alex was escorted to the police cruiser, still protesting about community resources and environmental justice, I surveyed the damage to my charging equipment. The electrical inspector who arrived on scene estimated the repair costs would run into thousands of dollars. More importantly, he noted that the unauthorized modifications could have voided my homeowner's insurance coverage if a fire had occurred. This Incident, while frightening, provided exactly the kind of official documentation I needed for the upcoming HOA hearing. The fire department report, police statements, and electrical inspector's assessment would be hard for even Alex to dismiss as merely a neighborly disagreement about shared resources. The day after the electrical fire incident, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. News of what happened had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire, and suddenly, people who had been swayed by Alex's environmental sharing narrative were seeing the situation in a very different light. The reality of how close we'd come to a potentially devastating fire had shaken the community. Local news had picked up the story, running a segment about the dangers of unauthorized EV charger use. They didn't name names, but everyone in Pine Ridge Estates knew exactly who they were talking about. The reporter interviewed Chief Martinez, who used our incident as a cautionary tale about the importance of proper electrical safety and respecting private property. What we saw here wasn't just theft of utilities, he explained on camera. The unauthorized modifications to the charging equipment created a serious safety hazard that could have affected the entire neighborhood. We're seeing more cases like this as EV adoption increases, and people need to understand that charging equipment isn't something you can tamper with. The morning's mail brought the official fire department report, along with a notice from my insurance company. The insurance adjuster had already been notified of the incident and wanted to conduct their own investigation. More concerning was their warning that any future unauthorized use of my charging equipment could result in cancellation of my policy. My security cameras captured an interesting parade of activity that day. Several members of Alex's charging club drove by slowly, clearly checking to see if the charger was still operational. A few even had the nerve to knock on my door, asking when the community charging station would be back in service. Each time, I patiently explained that it was never a community resource to begin with, and now it was evidence in an ongoing investigation. The electrical inspector returned for a more thorough assessment of the damage. His findings were worse than initially thought. Whoever tried to modify this didn't just damage the external components, he explained, showing me close-up photos of the charger's internals. They attempted to bypass several critical safety features. The fact that it only resulted in minor sparking is honestly miraculous. His report detailed how the tampering had compromised multiple systems: the ground fault protection, the thermal monitoring, and the power management controls. The estimated repair costs had climbed to nearly $4,000, and that didn't include the recommended upgrades to prevent future tampering attempts. Mid-afternoon, I received an unexpected visit from Trevor, one of Alex's regular charging club members. He seemed nervous, clutching a manila envelope. "I want to come clean," he said, glancing over his shoulder as if worried about being seen. "Alex told us she had permission to resell access to your charger. She said it was part of a neighborhood green energy initiative." Trevor handed me the envelope. Inside was a detailed ledger of payments made to Alex for charger access, along with copies of the digital calendar she'd used to coordinate charging sessions. Most shockingly, there were screenshots of a private WhatsApp group where she'd advertised exclusive access to private level 2 charging for a monthly fee. She charged us each $100 a month, Trevor explained, looking ashamed. Said it was for maintenance and electricity costs. When some people complained about the price, she said it was still cheaper than installing our own chargers or using public stations. This evidence was a goldmine. Not only had Alex been stealing my electricity, but she'd been running a profitable side business doing it. The ledger showed she'd collected over $3,000 in fees from various Tesla owners over the past 3 months, all while using my electricity and equipment without permission. Immediately called Officer Chen to report this new information. She arrived within the hour, carefully documenting everything Trevor had provided. "This changes things significantly," she noted, reviewing the payment records. We're no longer just talking about utility theft. This could be considered running an unauthorized business and criminal fraud. As Officer Chen was leaving, my phone buzzed with an email from Marcus Thompson, the HOA president. The board had called an emergency session in light of the fire incident and new evidence. The hearing, originally scheduled for next week, was moved up to tomorrow morning. Given the serious nature of recent events and the potential safety risk to the community, his email read, the board feels this matter requires immediate attention. Please bring all relevant documentation, including the fire department report and any evidence of unauthorized commercial activity. I spent the rest of the evening organizing my documentation into a clear, chronological presentation. The stack of evidence had grown considerably. Utility bills showing the spike in electricity usage, security camera footage, witness statements, the fire department report, Trevor's payment records, and the electrical inspector's assessment. As I reviewed everything, a notification popped up on my phone. Alex had posted a lengthy statement in the neighborhood Facebook group, trying to get ahead of tomorrow's hearing. Her post was a masterpiece of spin, painting herself as a victim of outdated property norms who was just trying to facilitate green energy adoption in our community. She even had the audacity to suggest that the fire incident proved we needed proper community charging infrastructure rather than selfish private solutions. The comments section quickly filled with responses, but unlike a few weeks ago, very few were sympathetic to her position. The near miss with the fire had changed people's perspectives dramatically. As one neighbor succinctly put it, sharing is caring, but theft and endangerment are crimes. The morning of the emergency HOA hearing arrived with an unexpected twist. As I pulled into the community center parking lot, I noticed an unfamiliar face standing next to Alex, a sharp-dressed man who I would soon learn was Jeremy Sterling, her hastily hired attorney. This wasn't supposed to be a legal proceeding, but apparently Alex had decided to up the stakes. The community center's meeting room was packed. Word had spread about the fire incident, and it seemed like half the neighborhood had shown up to witness the proceedings. Marcus Thompson sat at the center of the board table, flanked by other HOA officials. The atmosphere was tense as he called the meeting to order. "Before we begin," Sterling announced, standing up, "my client would like to propose a settlement." He pulled out a document with flourish. "Ms. Watson is willing to purchase the charging equipment at its current market value and assume all maintenance responsibilities. This would resolve any disputes about ownership and access." I couldn't help but laugh. The charger isn't for sale. And given that your client's actions have likely voided its warranty and caused thousands in damage, I'm not sure why you think this is a reasonable proposal." Marcus Thompson cleared his throat. "Mr. Sterling, while we appreciate your presence, this is not a legal negotiation. This is a homeowners association hearing about serious violations of our community guidelines and potential safety hazards." Sterling pressed on, his tone condescending. "My client has been a victim of hostile and discriminatory treatment. The charging station is in a shared driveway, which makes it a common area amenity. Furthermore, Ms. Watson has been instrumental in promoting green energy adoption in this community." At this point, I opened my laptop and connected it to the room's projector. "I'd like to present some evidence that might clarify the situation," I said, pulling up my meticulously organized documentation. "First, let's look at the installation permits and property records that clearly show the charger is on my property, not in a common area." For the next 20 minutes, I methodically presented my case. The security footage of late-night charging sessions played silently in the background as I walked through the utility bills showing the theft of electricity. When I reached the fire department report and electrical inspector's assessment, several board members visibly recoiled at the photos of the damaged equipment. "And now," I said, "I'd like to address Mr. Sterling's claim about promoting green energy." I pulled up Trevor's evidence, the payment ledger, WhatsApp screenshots and charging schedule. Ms. Watson wasn't promoting environmentalism. She was running an illegal business using my property and utilities. Sterling attempted to interject, but Marcus Thompson waved him off. "Ms. Watson," he said, turning to Alex, "would you care to explain these payment records?" Alex's composure finally cracked. "Everyone benefits from shared resources," she burst out. "I was providing a valuable service to the community. Do you know how much it costs to install a private charger? I was helping people save money by stealing from your neighbor and endangering the community." Mrs. Gonzalez, another board member, asked sharply. "The fire department report says we could have had a serious incident." Sterling tried to regain control. "My client admits there may have been some misunderstandings about proper procedures, but her intentions were to profit," I interrupted, pulling up one final piece of evidence. "This is a recording from my security camera, 2 days before the fire incident. You can clearly hear Ms. Watson explaining her pricing structure to a new member of her charging club." The room fell silent as Alex's voice filled the space. "Trust me, $100 a month is a steal. Installing your own charger would cost thousands. Don't worry about the owner. They're just being selfish. We're entitled to use any amenities. In the shared driveway." Sterling's face tightened as he whispered something to Alex, who had gone pale. Marcus Thompson cleared his throat again. "I think we've seen enough. The board will take a brief recess to discuss this matter." As the board members filed out, I noticed Officer Chen had slipped into the back of the room. She caught my eye and gave a slight nod. The police had been keeping tabs on the situation, particularly after the fire incident and Trevor's evidence of fraud. The recess lasted barely 15 minutes. When the board returned, Marcus Thompson's expression was grave. "Based on the evidence presented, the board has reached a unanimous decision. Ms. Watson's actions constitute multiple violations of our community guidelines, including unauthorized use of private property, operating an illegal business, and creating a serious safety hazard." He paused, shuffling some papers. "The board is imposing the maximum fine allowed under our bylaws, $5,000 for repeated violations. Additionally, we are requiring Ms. Watson to reimburse all documented damages and stolen utilities. Finally, we are referring this matter to the authorities for potential criminal charges." Alex jumped up, her face flushed. "This is outrageous. I'll appeal. You can't—" "Ms. Watson," Officer Chen spoke up from the back of the room, "I believe we need to have a conversation about operating an unlicensed business and utility theft. Would you prefer to do this here or down at the station?" The scene that unfolded after the HOA hearing was something I never expected to witness in our quiet community. Officer Chen had given Alex the choice to provide her statement at the station, but Alex's response was to launch into a loud tirade about bourgeois property rights and environmental classism. Her lawyer, Sterling, tried desperately to quiet her, but she was beyond listening. "You're all so obsessed with your private property that you can't see the bigger picture," she shouted, pacing the community center floor. "This is exactly why. Climate change is getting worse because people won't share resources." Her voice echoed through the room as neighbors watched in uncomfortable silence. Sterling attempted to intervene, placing a restraining hand on her arm. "Ms. Watson, I strongly advise you to stop speaking and—" "No!" She jerked away from him. "I'm not going to be silenced by some outdated concepts of ownership. Do you know how many carbon emissions we prevented by sharing that charger? I was providing a community service." Officer Chen maintained her professional composure. "Ma'am, operating an unlicensed business, utility theft, and endangering public safety through unauthorized modification of electrical equipment are serious offenses. We can discuss environmental impact statements at the station. What happened next would become neighborhood legend. Alex, realizing she was cornered, made a sudden dash for the door. In her designer heels, she made it about 10 feet before stumbling. Sterling watched in horror as his client tried to flee from law enforcement, effectively transforming what might have been a minor criminal charge into a more serious situation. 2 additional officers, who had been waiting outside as a precaution, intercepted her at the community center entrance. As they led her to the police car, she continued her rant about environmental justice and community resources, her voice carrying across the parking lot where a small crowd of neighbors had gathered. Sterling, looking decidedly less polished than when he'd arrived, approached me with a new proposition. "My client is clearly under a lot of stress," he began, straightening his tie. "Perhaps we could discuss an out-of-court settlement, cover the damages, utilities, and, let's say, additional compensation for your inconvenience." Before I could respond, Marcus Thompson joined us. "Mr. Sterling, given that your client just attempted to flee from law enforcement, I believe any settlement discussions should include the district attorney's office." He handed Sterling a thick envelope. "This contains the board's official decision, including the fine assessment and documentation of violations. I suggest you review it with your client once she's processed at the station." The aftermath of the hearing continued to unfold throughout the day. News crews arrived, drawn by reports of the incident. The local evening news would later run a story about Tesla charging scheme leads to arrest, complete with footage of Alex being escorted to the police car while ranting about environmental justice. My phone began buzzing with messages from other Tesla owners who had been part of Alex's charging club. Many were desperate to make amends, offering to testify about her scheme in exchange for leniency. Trevor, who had already provided evidence, helped coordinate these communications, creating a detailed list of everyone involved and how much they had paid. The most surprising message came from Alex's real estate broker. "We've received complaints about Ms. Watson using unauthorized charging access as a selling point for properties," the email read. "Our firm takes these allegations very seriously, and we're conducting an internal investigation. Would you be willing to share your documentation?" By late afternoon, the police had executed a search warrant on Alex's home, discovering detailed records of her charging scheme. The evidence was damning. Spreadsheets tracking payments, marketing materials promoting exclusive community charging access, and even a business plan for expanding her unauthorized charging network to other neighborhoods. My insurance company's investigation also kicked into high gear. Their forensic accountant's preliminary review suggested that Alex had collected over $8,000 in charging fees while stealing approximately $3,500 worth of electricity. When combined with the damage to the charging equipment and potential liability issues, the total impact was substantial. The utility company launched their own investigation, particularly concerned about the unauthorized modifications to the charging equipment. Their senior safety inspector arrived to document the tampering, taking extensive photographs and measurements. "This kind of modification could have caused a catastrophic failure," he explained, pointing out where safety systems had been bypassed. "We'll be including this case in our training materials as an example of what not to do." As evening fell, I sat in my home office, reviewing the day's events with a mixture of relief and disbelief. The HOA fine was just the beginning. Alex now faced potential criminal charges, civil litigation, and professional consequences. Her attempt to flee had only made things worse, transforming what might have been a simple restitution case into something much more serious. My security cameras captured one final scene that night: Alex's Tesla being towed from her driveway. The police had impounded it as evidence, particularly interested in modifications made to its charging system that might have contributed to the dangerous tampering with my equipment. The sight of her prized vehicle being hauled away seemed like a fitting end to a day that had changed our quiet neighborhood forever. The morning after Alex's arrest, Sterling appeared at my door looking significantly more disheveled than during the HOA hearing. His client had spent the night in custody, and he was desperate to negotiate some kind of deal before the situation spiraled further out of control. "My client is willing to make full restitution," he began, clutching a leather portfolio. "We can cover the HOA fines, repair costs, stolen utilities, everything, plus an additional $5,000 for your inconvenience. All we ask is that you don't press criminal charges." I invited him in, mainly because the conversation wasn't one I wanted to have on my doorstep where curious neighbors might overhear. As we sat in my living room, I couldn't help but notice how his confident demeanor from yesterday had evaporated. "Mr. Sterling," I replied, "I'm not sure you understand the situation. This isn't just about money anymore. Your client was running an illegal business that created a serious safety hazard. The fire department, police, utility company, and my insurance provider are all involved now. This is beyond my control." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Look, there's something you should know. Ms. Watson's real estate license could be in jeopardy if this goes forward. She's willing to sign a non-disclosure agreement, move out of the neighborhood, whatever it takes." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from Officer Chen. "More victims coming forward. Watson ran similar schemes in 2 other neighborhoods. Need to talk ASAP." I showed Sterling the message. His face fell as he realized the implications. This wasn't just about my charger anymore. Alex had apparently been running a systematic operation across multiple locations. Just then, a knock at the door interrupted us. It was Rachel Martinez, the HOA's legal counsel, who had apparently been summoned by Marcus Thompson after yesterday's events. She took one look at Sterling and shook her head. "I hope you're not attempting to negotiate a private settlement," she said sharply. "The HOA has already filed a separate complaint regarding Ms. Watson's actions. This is now a matter of community safety and legal compliance." Sterling's attempts at damage control were further derailed when my security system alerted me to movement near the charger. We all watched on my phone as 2 men in utility company uniforms examined the damaged equipment. They were accompanied by someone wearing an FBI windbreaker. "That would be the federal investigation," Rachel explained, noting Sterling's puzzled expression. "Unauthorized modification of power distribution equipment can fall under federal jurisdiction, especially when it involves interstate commerce, like, say, collecting payments through digital platforms for illegal utility access." The gravity of the situation finally seemed to hit Sterling. He packed up his portfolio without another word and hurried out, nearly colliding with Officer Chen, who was just arriving. The officer had brought evidence collected from Alex's home computer. "We found spreadsheets dating back 6 months, she explained, laying out printed documents. She was running similar operations in Oakwood Heights and River Glen communities. Same pattern: identify homes with private chargers, create a sharing scheme, collect payments. The spreadsheets revealed a sophisticated operation. Alex had been tracking peak charging times, maintenance schedules, and homeowner patterns. She even had notes about which neighbors might be sympathetic to her environmental sharing initiative and could be recruited as allies. More disturbing were the emails recovered from her computer. She had been in discussions with several other real estate agents about expanding the scheme. "Think of it as an unofficial charging network," one email read. "We can offer it as an unlisted amenity to Tesla owners looking to buy in these neighborhoods." The utility company investigators had their own revelations. The tampering with my charger wasn't an isolated incident. They found evidence that similar Modifications had been attempted on other charging stations in the area. The pattern suggested someone with technical knowledge had been helping Alex bypass safety systems. As we reviewed all this new information, my insurance adjuster called. The company had decided to treat this as a case of organized utility theft rather than simple, unauthorized use. This designation would actually work in my favor, as it triggered different coverage clauses and would help ensure I was fully compensated. For damages, Rachel took copious notes throughout these discussions. The HOA will be amending its complaint, she explained. This is no longer just about violation of community guidelines. Ms. Watson's actions represent a systematic attempt to exploit and endanger multiple communities. By late afternoon, news. Vans had started appearing in the neighborhood again. The story had evolved from a local dispute to something much bigger, an organized scheme targeting multiple communities with potential federal implications. Sterling made one final attempt to contact me, this time via email. His message was brief. Client willing to accept all federal and state charges regarding utility theft and unauthorized business operation in exchange for HOA dropping their complaint. Please consider. Rachel read the email and laughed. He really doesn't get it, does he? The HOA's complaint is probably the least of his client's worries now. She's looking at federal charges, multiple civil suits, and professional disciplinary actions. And that's just the beginning. The case took a dramatic turn when the FBI's cybercrime unit became more heavily involved. Special Agent Sarah Rodriguez requested a meeting at my home to discuss some concerning discoveries they'd made while analyzing Alex's electronic devices. What we found goes beyond simple utility theft, she explained, spreading documents across my dining room table. Ms. Watson was part of a larger network of real estate agents and Tesla owners who were exploiting private charging stations across multiple states. They called themselves the Green Energy Liberation Network. The documents revealed a sophisticated operation. Members used encrypted messaging apps to coordinate their activities, sharing tips on how to identify vulnerable charging stations and manipulate charging equipment. They even had a ranking system for different types of chargers and their accessibility. Your charger became what they called a premium node in their network. Agent Rodriguez continued, showing me screenshots from their encrypted chats. They considered the shared driveway setup ideal because it gave them plausible deniability. If confronted, they could claim they thought it was a common area amenity. The FBI had uncovered a digital payment system specifically set up for their unauthorized charging network. Members would pay monthly subscription fees that were disguised as consulting payments for environmental services. The money was then distributed among the organizers, with Alex receiving a percentage for each new node she added to the network. As we discussed these findings, Officer Chen arrived with more local evidence. The police had interviewed several members of Alex's charging club who were now cooperating with the investigation. Their statements painted a picture of how she had gradually built her operation. She started small, Officer Chen explained, reading from a witness statement. She'd approached Tesla owners at local charging stations, complaining about the cost and inconvenience. Then she'd mentioned knowing about alternative charging solutions in upscale neighborhoods. It was like a secret club, and people felt special being invited in. The testimony revealed how Alex had used her position as a real estate agent to legitimize the scheme. She would schedule fake house showings near homes with private chargers, using these appointments as cover to scout potential locations. She kept detailed notes on homeowners' schedules, noting when they were typically away or asleep. My own charger had apparently been particularly valuable to the network because of my predictable work schedule and the quality of my charging equipment. Alex had specifically targeted my property after learning about my involvement in renewable energy consulting, assuming I would be sympathetic to her resource-sharing philosophy. The investigation had also uncovered something that made my blood run cold: detailed plans for expanding their operation. Alex and her associates had been mapping out charging stations across the entire East Coast, identifying potential targets and vulnerable locations. They were planning to create what they called charging corridors, Agent Rodriguez explained, showing me a map marked with red dots. Networks of unauthorized access points along major highway routes. They even had a mobile app in development to help members locate these stations. As we reviewed more evidence, we discovered that Alex had been keeping detailed records of her interactions with me. Every conversation, every confrontation, every attempt I'd made to stop her from using my charger, all of it had been documented and shared with her network as a case study in handling resistant owners. The most disturbing revelation came when Agent Rodriguez showed me their analysis of the charging equipment tampering. The modifications weren't amateur work, she explained. They had help from someone with significant electrical engineering experience. We've identified similar tampering patterns at other locations across 3 states. This explained why the damage to my charger had been so sophisticated. The network had apparently recruited a former Tesla technician who had been fired for unauthorized modifications to company equipment. He had developed methods for bypassing safety systems and increasing charging speeds beyond manufacturer specifications. The potential for disaster was enormous, the FBI's technical expert explained via video call. These modifications could have caused catastrophic failures. We're talking about potential fires, electrical surges, even explosions. They were playing with extremely dangerous technology. The scope of the investigation was growing by the hour. What had started as a local dispute over unauthorized charging had uncovered a multi-state criminal enterprise. The FBI was now coordinating with law enforcement agencies in several states, tracking down other members of the network and identifying more compromised charging stations. Rachel Martinez, the HOA's legal counsel, had been taking detailed notes throughout these revelations. "This changes everything," she said, closing her notebook. "The HOA's fine now seems almost trivial in comparison. We're looking at federal charges, RICO violations, potential terrorism charges given the infrastructure tampering." As the meeting concluded, Agent Rodriguez informed me that I would likely be called as a key witness in the federal case. "Your documentation of Ms. Watson's activities provided the thread that helped us unravel this entire operation," she explained. "Without your detailed records and security footage, we might never have discovered the broader conspiracy." The following day, our quiet neighborhood transformed into what looked like a scene from a crime drama. FBI agents, accompanied by state police and utility company investigators, executed coordinated search warrants on Alex's house and several other properties connected to the charging network. In Alex's garage, they discovered a makeshift workshop filled with charging equipment components and modified circuit boards. Technical manuals, some with handwritten modifications, were scattered across a workbench. A whiteboard on the wall displayed what appeared to be a complex schedule of charging, rotations and payment collections. "This was essentially their research and development center," explained Agent Rodriguez, as we watched the evidence being catalogued and removed. They were experimenting with different methods of bypassing security features on various charging equipment models. The potential for disaster was even greater than we initially thought. The FBI's forensic team had also discovered something that made the case even more serious: detailed blueprints of electrical substations in several states. These documents, found hidden in a false bottom of Alex's desk drawer, suggested the group had been planning to expand their operations to include larger-scale power infrastructure. Meanwhile, Sterling had been replaced by a high-powered criminal defense attorney, Patricia Morrison, known for handling complex federal cases. She arrived at the local FBI field office in a sleek black SUV, demanding to meet with prosecutors immediately. The meeting lasted several hours, but Alex emerged without any deal. Ms. Watson's position is still that she was promoting environmental responsibility through resource sharing, Morrison announced to the press gathered outside. We maintain that any technical modifications were aimed at improving efficiency, not creating hazards. This statement prompted an immediate response from the Department of Energy, which had joined the investigation due to the infrastructure security implications. Their spokesperson held an impromptu press conference right there in the parking lot. Unauthorized modification of power distribution equipment isn't environmental activism. It's a serious federal crime that puts communities at risk, he stated firmly. The department is treating this case as a significant threat to critical infrastructure security. Back in the neighborhood, the utility company had brought in a specialized team to assess the full extent of damage to my charging equipment. What they found was shocking. The modifications hadn't just affected my charger, but had potentially compromised the local power grid. They installed what we call a bypass bridge, the lead technician explained, showing me a small device they discovered hidden inside the charger's housing. It allowed them to draw more power than the system was rated for, while hiding the true usage from monitoring systems. This could have caused a cascade failure affecting the entire neighborhoods or power supply. The insurance investigators were equally alarmed. My adjuster called an emergency meeting with his supervisors, as this case now involved potential terrorism-related claims. They brought in a specialized risk assessment team to evaluate the broader implications. Your policy doesn't typically cover acts of terrorism, the senior claims manager explained, but since you reported the unauthorized use immediately and took steps to prevent it, we're classifying this as a covered criminal act. We'll be pursuing full restitution from all responsible parties. Throughout the day, more members of Alex's charging network were being identified and questioned. Some immediately turned on their former associates, hoping for leniency. Others maintained they were just environmentally conscious Tesla owners who thought they'd found a convenient charging solution. One of the most damaging testimonies came from Derek, the former Tesla technician who had helped modify the charging equipment. In exchange for immunity, he provided detailed information about the network's technical operations. They approached me after I left Tesla, saying they wanted to create an alternative charging infrastructure, he told investigators. It started with simple modifications to increase charging speeds, but they kept pushing for more aggressive changes. When I realized how dangerous it was getting, I tried to back out, but they threatened to expose my involvement. As the day progressed, the scale of the operation became clearer. The FBI had identified over 50 compromised charging stations across 6 states. The total amount of stolen electricity was estimated at over $100,000, but the potential cost of damages to infrastructure and private property was much higher. Local news crews maintained a constant presence in the neighborhood, interviewing residents and filming the ongoing investigation. National media had picked up the story, framing it as a cautionary tale about the dark side of the green energy movement. This case represents a perfect storm of technology, environmental activism, and criminal enterprise, commented one legal analyst on a national news network. It shows how legitimate concerns about climate change and resource sharing can be exploited by bad actors for profit. By evening, the FBI had set up a dedicated hotline for potential victims of the charging scheme to come forward. The phones started ringing immediately, suggesting that the network's operations were even more widespread than initially thought. As the investigation continued to unfold, I focused on implementing a permanent solution to protect my property and prevent any future unauthorized access. The utility company had assigned their top security specialist, Michael Zhang, to help. design a comprehensive security system for my charging equipment. What happened here has exposed vulnerabilities we never anticipated, Michael explained as we surveyed the damage. We're using your case to develop new security protocols for private charging installations across the country. The silver lining is that your experience might prevent this from happening to others. The new security system he designed was impressive. It included biometric authentication, real-time power monitoring, and automated alerts for any unusual activity. The charging unit itself would be housed in a reinforced cabinet with tamper-proof seals and security cameras that would automatically notify both me and the utility company if anyone attempted unauthorized access. We're also installing a new type of smart meter, Michael continued, showing me the sophisticated equipment. It can detect and prevent power surges from modified charging equipment. If someone tries to bypass the safety features again, the system will automatically shut down and alert authorities. The cost of these upgrades was substantial, nearly $15,000, but the utility company had agreed to cover most of it as part of their infrastructure security initiative. They saw this as an opportunity to test new protection measures that could be implemented more widely as electric vehicle adoption increased. Insurance companies were taking notice too. My provider had begun developing new policy riders specifically for EV charging equipment, using my case as a model for risk assessment. They brought in consultants to evaluate different security measures and their effectiveness in preventing unauthorized access. Your case has highlighted a major gap in coverage, explained Sandra Chen, my insurance company's risk assessment manager. We are now requiring all homeowners with Level 2 chargers to implement minimum security standards to maintain their coverage. The industry is calling it the Watson Protocol, named after your neighbor, ironically enough. The HOA had also taken dramatic action. They called an emergency meeting to revise the community guidelines, adding strict regulations about charging equipment installation and usage. Any resident installing a new charger would need to meet specific security requirements and register their equipment with both the HOA and utility company. Marcus Thompson had become particularly invested in the issue. We can't just think about individual properties anymore, he explained during the meeting. This is about protecting our entire community's infrastructure. What happened to you could have affected everyone's power supply. The new guidelines included mandatory security features for all charging equipment, regular inspections, and steep fines for any unauthorized modifications. The HOA also created a special committee to oversee charging infrastructure in the community, with representatives from the utility company and local law enforcement serving as advisors. As these changes were being implemented, I received an unexpected visit from Tesla's corporate security team. They had been following the case closely and wanted to inspect the modified charging equipment as part of their own investigation. We've seen a rise in charging equipment tampering across the country, explained Diana Roberts, Tesla's head of security. Your case has helped us identify a pattern we might have missed otherwise. We're now developing new safeguards for our charging network and working on ways to detect unauthorized modifications more quickly. The Tesla team spent several hours examining the damaged equipment and reviewing my security footage. They were particularly interested in how Alex's network had managed to bypass their vehicle's built-in charging safeguards. This goes beyond simple theft, Diana noted, photographing the modified components. They found ways to override safety features we thought were foolproof. We're going to need to update our vehicle software to prevent this kind of manipulation. As part of their response, Tesla announced they would be pushing a software update to all their vehicles, adding new security features to prevent unauthorized charging and detect attempted tampering. They also offered to replace my damaged charging equipment with their latest wall connector model, complete with enhanced security features. The utility company used my case to launch a public awareness campaign about charging equipment safety. They produced educational materials warning about the dangers of unauthorized modifications and offering guidelines for secure charging installation. Your experience has become a catalyst for change, Michael told me as we reviewed the final security upgrades. We're seeing utilities across the country implementing similar measures. Sometimes it takes a crisis to expose vulnerabilities we didn't know existed. By the time all the new security measures were in place, my charging setup had become something of a model for the industry. Security experts, insurance adjusters, and even other utility companies came to study the implementation, taking notes. For their own protocols, Alex's response to the mounting evidence and security upgrades was both desperate and calculated. Through her new attorney, Patricia Morrison, she launched a multi-pronged attack designed to discredit the investigation and paint herself as a misunderstood environmental activist. First came the media campaign. Morrison arranged for Alex to appear on several local news stations, presenting herself as a green energy advocate who was being persecuted for trying to promote sustainable practices. Dressed in earth tones and speaking with practiced sincerity, she attempted to reframe the entire situation. What we're seeing here is a clash between old-world thinking about property rights and the urgent need for community-based solutions to climate change, she declared in one interview. My client was simply trying to create an efficient sharing system for underutilized charging resources. The interviews carefully avoided mentioning the payment schemes, modified equipment, or infrastructure tampering. Instead, Alex focused on emotional appeals about environmental responsibility and community cooperation. She even launched a social media campaign with the hashtag #JeanShareTheCharge, attempting to rally support from environmental activists. Morrison also filed a series of motions challenging the evidence collection methods and the jurisdiction of federal authorities. The FBI's involvement is clearly excessive, she argued in court filings. This is, at most, a civil dispute between neighbors that has been unnecessarily escalated by overzealous law enforcement. Their legal strategy became clear. During a preliminary hearing, Morrison attempted to have much of the technical evidence thrown out, arguing that the modifications to charging equipment were protected under right-to-repair laws. She even brought in an expert witness, a professor of environmental law, to testify about the concept of necessity in environmental activism. Ms. Watson's actions, while perhaps technically outside current legal frameworks, were motivated by a legitimate concern for environmental protection, the professor testified. We need to consider whether existing property laws are adequate to address the urgent challenges of climate change. The prosecution, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney James Chen, was quick to dismantle this defense. Environmental activism doesn't justify fraud, theft, or endangering public safety, he countered. The defendant wasn't promoting sustainability. No, she was running a criminal enterprise for profit. Chen presented evidence showing that Alex had collected over $50,000 in membership fees from her charging network, none of which had gone toward environmental causes. Bank records revealed she had spent the money on luxury items and vacation trips, including a weekend spa retreat, ironically titled Eco Wellness Experience. Meanwhile, Alex attempted to rally support from environmental groups, but her efforts backfired spectacularly. Major environmental organizations quickly distanced themselves from her actions, with several issuing statements condemning the unauthorized modification of charging equipment as dangerous and counterproductive. Real environmental advocacy doesn't involve endangering communities or stealing resources, stated the director of Sustainable Energy Action Network. Ms. Watson's actions have actually harmed the cause of green energy adoption by creating safety concerns and eroding public trust. Even Alex's real estate colleagues turned against her. The State Real Estate Board launched their own investigation into her use of unauthorized charging access as a property selling point. Several clients came forward with complaints about how she had marketed properties with accessible charging without disclosing that this meant illegal access to private chargers. Morrison attempted to negotiate a plea deal, but prosecutors were unwilling to offer significant concessions given the scope of the evidence. The defendant's actions went far beyond simple utility theft, Chen explained during a press conference. This was a sophisticated criminal enterprise that put entire communities at risk. Alex's frustration became increasingly evident. During one court appearance, she burst out with an angry tirade about capitalism's stranglehold on green energy and had to be silenced by her attorney. The outburst made headlines, further damaging her attempt to portray herself as a reasonable environmental advocate. Her final desperate move was to try to sue me for discriminatory charging access under civil rights statutes, arguing that denial of charging access was a form of environmental discrimination. The lawsuit was quickly dismissed, with the judge noting that private property rights were not suspended simply because the property in question related to green energy. The media coverage of these events was extensive, with legal experts and environmental advocates weighing in on the broader implications. One cable news network ran a special report titled "Green Crime: When Environmental Activism Goes Wrong," featuring my case as its central example. As Alex's legal maneuvers continued to fail, the evidence against her only grew stronger. More members of her charging network came forward, many eager to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for leniency. Each new testimony revealed additional details about the scope and sophistication of her operation. The final phase of legal proceedings began with a series of coordinated actions across multiple jurisdictions. The federal prosecutor's office had built an airtight case, combining evidence from my situation with similar incidents uncovered across 6 states. The morning of the main hearing, the courthouse was packed with journalists, environmental activists, and curious members of the public. Assistant U.S. Attorney Chen opened with a devastating presentation that methodically dismantled Alex's environmental activist defense. He projected a large spreadsheet showing her network's financial transactions onto the courtroom screen. Over 18 months, he explained to the judge, the defendant's operation collected $157,432 in unauthorized charging fees. None of this money went to environmental causes. Instead, we found expenses for luxury items, including a $12,000 designer watch purchased the same week she claimed she couldn't afford to install her own charging station. The prosecution then revealed something that shocked even me. Alex had been planning to franchise her operation. They discovered a business plan on her laptop titled Green Energy Liberation Network Expansion Strategy 2025-2026. The document detailed how she planned to recruit other real estate agents to identify and exploit private charging stations across the entire eastern seaboard. This was never about environmental activism, Chen continued, displaying slides of Alex's marketing materials. It was a calculated criminal enterprise designed to profit from the growing adoption of electric vehicles. The defendant didn't just steal electricity. She created a sophisticated scheme to monetize other people's private property. The technical evidence was equally damning. The FBI's forensic team had recovered deleted messages showing Alex had actively sought out experts who could help bypass charging station security systems. She had even attended underground tech meetups where people traded information about exploiting vulnerabilities in various charging equipment. Derek, the former Tesla technician, provided crucial testimony about the technical aspects of the operation. Ms. Watson specifically requested modifications that would hide the true power consumption, he explained. She knew exactly what she was doing. This wasn't about improving efficiency, it was about concealing theft. The utility company's expert witness then detailed the potential consequences of their actions. Using computer simulations, he demonstrated how the modified charging equipment could have caused a cascading power failure affecting thousands of homes. The animations of potential disaster scenarios left the courtroom in stunned silence. Throughout the proceedings, Alex sat stone-faced beside her attorney. Her carefully crafted image of an environmental crusader had completely unraveled. The evidence showed not an idealistic activist, but a calculating entrepreneur who had exploited environmental concerns for personal gain. The prosecution's final witness was a senior EPA official who testified about the damage Alex's actions had done to legitimate environmental initiatives. Cases like this create public skepticism about genuine environmental programs, he explained. They make it harder for legitimate organizations to promote resource sharing and community-based solutions. When it was the defense's turn, Morrison tried one last strategy, arguing that the rapid adoption of electric vehicles had created a regulatory vacuum that her client had simply tried to fill. Ms. Watson saw a need in the community and attempted to address it, she argued. While her methods may have been flawed, her intentions were aligned with the public interest. The judge was unimpressed. Theft doesn't become legal simply because you call it resource sharing, he noted, and endangering public safety isn't excused by environmental concerns. The pivotal moment came when the prosecution presented evidence of Alex's activities after the initial HOA hearing. Rather than stopping her operation when confronted, she had actually accelerated it, recruiting more members and attempting to expand to other neighborhoods even as investigations were underway. This demonstrates a complete disregard for the law and public safety, Chen argued. Even after being warned about the dangers, the defendant chose to escalate her criminal activities. The judge's response was resolute. He rejected all of Morrison's motions to dismiss various charges and denied their request for a lenient sentence based on environmental considerations. The court recognizes the importance of environmental protection, he stated, but it cannot be used as a shield for criminal enterprise. As the proceedings drew to a close, it became clear that Alex's elaborate scheme had finally caught up with her. The combination of technical evidence, financial records, and testimony from former associates had created an insurmountable case. The judge's stern demeanor suggested that sentencing would not be light. In the wake of the legal proceedings, implementing comprehensive security measures became the top priority. The FBI's cybersecurity team, working alongside utility company experts, developed a multi-layered protection system that would serve as a model for private charging installations nationwide. The new security setup was impressive in its sophistication. Biometric authentication systems were installed on all access points, requiring both fingerprint and facial recognition for activation. The charging equipment itself was enclosed in a reinforced cabinet with tamper-evident seals and multiple security cameras providing 360-degree coverage. "We're treating this like critical infrastructure protection," explained Agent Rodriguez, overseeing the installation. The system includes real-time monitoring that can detect any unauthorized attempts to modify or access the equipment. Any suspicious activity triggers immediate alerts to both law enforcement and the utility company. The utility company went even further, installing a new type of smart meter specifically designed to prevent the kind of power theft Alex's network had perpetrated. The meter could detect unusual power draws and automatically shut down if it sensed any attempt to bypass security features. "What happened here has changed how we think about EV charging security," said Michael Zhang, the utility company's head of security. "We're now requiring similar protection measures for all new Level 2 charging installations in our service area." The most innovative feature was a blockchain-based authentication system that created an unalterable record of every charging session. Each use of the charger would be logged with specific vehicle identification numbers, making it impossible for unauthorized users to hide their activities. Insurance companies took notice of these security upgrades. My provider used the new system as a template for their updated coverage requirements. They began offering premium discounts to homeowners who implemented similar security measures on their charging equipment. "The Watson protocol is becoming the industry standard," explained Sandra Chen from my insurance company. "We're seeing adoption across the country as other insurers recognize the importance of protecting against this type of theft." The HOA also took action, implementing strict new guidelines for charging equipment installation and maintenance. Any resident installing a new charger would need to meet specific security requirements and undergo regular safety inspections. "Your case has opened our eyes to vulnerabilities we never considered," Marcus Thompson told me during an HOA meeting. "These new regulations will help protect not just individual homeowners, but our entire community's infrastructure." Tesla's corporate security team made several visits to study the new security measures. They were particularly interested in how the system could be integrated with their vehicle software to prevent unauthorized charging attempts. "We're pushing a software update to all our vehicles that will include enhanced security features," explained Diana Roberts from Tesla. "Cars will now verify that they're authorized to use specific charging equipment before drawing power." The Department of Energy took notice as well, sending a team to document the security implementation. They planned to incorporate the findings into their guidelines for critical infrastructure protection related to electric vehicle charging networks. Local. Law enforcement received specialized training in identifying and responding to charging equipment tampering. Officer Chen helped develop a program that would be shared with police departments across the country. "What we learned from this case will help prevent similar schemes from succeeding elsewhere," she explained during a training session. "We now know what signs to look for and how to properly investigate these incidents." The media continued to follow the security implementations closely. Several technical publications wrote detailed articles about the new protection measures, dubbing them the new gold standard for EV charging security. Community interest remained high as well. Neighbors regularly stopped by to see the security upgrades, often seeking advice about protecting their own charging equipment. The incident had created a heightened awareness of the importance of proper security measures. "It's amazing how one case can drive so much positive change," remarked Mrs. Chen from across the street. "Who would have thought your trouble with Alex would end up improving charging security for everyone?" The final piece of the security upgrade was a public awareness campaign launched by the utility company. They produced educational materials warning about the dangers of unauthorized charging and equipment modification, using lessons learned from the case to illustrate potential risks. The neighborhood changed dramatically in the months following Alex's conviction. Her house sat empty, a for sale sign swaying in the breeze, a silent reminder of how one person's actions had transformed our community. The real estate agency handling the sale had to disclose the property's involvement in the charging scheme, which significantly impacted buyer interest. The shared driveway, once a source of constant tension, had been completely redesigned. The HOA approved my proposal to install clear boundary markers and security lighting, making it impossible for anyone to claim confusion about property lines. My new charging station, secured behind its high-tech enclosure, became a symbol of the community's commitment to protecting private property while supporting green initiatives. Other changes were more subtle but equally significant. Neighbors who had initially been swayed by Alex's environmental sharing rhetoric now approached green initiatives with more caution and respect for proper procedures. The HOA established a legitimate charging station sharing program, complete with proper insurance, safety measures, and fair compensation for electricity usage. What happened here taught us all an important lesson, Marcus Thompson remarked during a community meeting. We can support environmental initiatives without compromising safety or property rights. It's about finding the right balance. The impact extended far beyond our neighborhood. My case had become a cautionary tale in the EV community, featured in industry publications and safety seminars. Charging equipment manufacturers began incorporating enhanced security features into their standard models, often referring to the Watson incident when explaining the need for such measures. Insurance. Companies across the country adjusted their policies to address the risks exposed by the case. My provider's new EV Protection Plus rider, which included coverage for unauthorized usage and equipment tampering, became a model for the industry. Other insurers quickly followed suit, creating similar specialized coverage options. The utility company's security protocols, developed in response to our case, were adopted by power companies in multiple states. Their public awareness campaign about charging safety reached millions of customers, helping prevent similar schemes from taking root elsewhere. Local law enforcement agencies incorporated lessons from the case into their training programs. Officer Chen, who had handled the initial investigation, became a sought-after speaker at police conferences, sharing insights about investigating technology-related property crimes. This case changed how we approach electric vehicle-related crimes, she explained during one presentation. It showed us that what might appear to be a simple neighbor dispute could actually be part of a larger criminal enterprise. The FBI used the case to develop new guidelines for investigating charging infrastructure tampering. Agent Rodriguez's team created a comprehensive training module that would help other field officers identify and respond to similar schemes. What we learned here has helped us prevent several similar operations from getting established, she told me during a follow-up visit. Criminal enterprises are always looking for new opportunities, but now we know what signs to watch for. Professional organizations took notice as well. The National Association of Realtors added a section to their ethics guidelines specifically addressing the marketing of charging access. Real estate agents nationwide received training about proper disclosure requirements for EV charging amenities. Environmental groups also evolved their approach to resource-sharing initiatives. The Sustainable Energy Action Network launched a program promoting legitimate community charging solutions, explicitly distinguishing them from unauthorized access schemes. We can advocate for expanded charging access without supporting illegal activities, their director stated in a press release. This case showed us the importance of working within proper legal and safety frameworks. Tesla's corporate response went beyond just security updates. They established a program to help homeowners properly share their charging equipment, complete with secure payment processing and liability protection. The program, dubbed Tesla Share, became a model for other manufacturers. The most surprising outcome was how the case influenced public policy. Several state legislatures used it as a catalyst to update their utilities laws, creating clearer frameworks for EV charging access and stronger penalties for unauthorized use. My role in all this was unexpected. I began receiving invitations, to speak at industry conferences and community forums, sharing my experience to help others protect their property and promote responsible charging practices. My professional expertise in energy consulting, combined with my first-hand experience, provided a unique perspective on the challenges of securing charging infrastructure. 1 year after the initial incident, I stood in my driveway looking at the transformed charging station. The sophisticated security enclosure, with its biometric locks and surveillance systems, served as a constant reminder of how a simple neighborly dispute had evolved into a landmark case that changed the EV charging landscape nationwide. The final court decisions had been decisive. Alex received a 10-year prison sentence for multiple federal charges, including infrastructure tampering, fraud, and operating an illegal enterprise. The judge also imposed $10,000 in criminal fines, plus restitution to all victims of her charging scheme. Her real estate license was permanently revoked, and she was barred from working in any capacity involving property management or utility services. The financial impact on Alex was substantial. Beyond the criminal penalties, civil judgments against her totaled over $200,000, including damages owed to homeowners whose charging equipment she had compromised. The utility company's lawsuit alone resulted in a $75,000 judgment for infrastructure damage and stolen electricity. Her former home finally sold at a significant discount to a young family who immediately installed their own charging station. Properly permitted and secured with the new standard protocols that my case had helped establish. They often wave when they see me, and we've developed the kind of neighborly relationship I'd originally hoped to have with Alex. The FBI's investigation ultimately identified over 100 victims across 8 states. Agent Rodriguez's team used evidence from my case to shut down 3 similar operations before they could fully establish themselves. Your documentation and security footage provided the blueprint for identifying these schemes, she told me during a follow-up visit. The utility company's new security protocols, developed in response to our case, became known as the Watson standards in the industry. Power companies nationwide adopted similar measures, and charging equipment manufacturers began incorporating enhanced security features into their basic models. My role in all this continued to evolve. I found myself regularly consulting with homeowners associations and utility companies, helping them develop secure charging access programs that balanced environmental benefits with proper safety measures. The experience even led to a new division in my consulting firm, specializing in EV infrastructure security. The HOA's legitimate charging sharing program, implemented after Alex's conviction, became a model for other communities. Residents could now share charging access through proper channels with fair compensation and full insurance coverage. The program demonstrated how the environmental goals Alex claimed to support could be achieved legally and safely. Tesla's corporate response was particularly meaningful. They not only improved their vehicle security systems, but also established a nationwide program to help homeowners safely share charging access. What happened in your case showed us the need for better infrastructure protection, Diana Roberts explained during the program's launch. The insurance industry's transformation was equally significant. The Watson protocol for EV charging coverage became standard across the industry, with my provider using our case to develop comprehensive protection packages for homeowners with charging equipment. Local law enforcement agencies incorporated the case into their training programs. Officer Chen, who handled the initial investigation, became a recognized expert in technology-related property crimes. Your case taught us to look beyond the surface of seemingly simple disputes, she noted during a recent training session. The most lasting impact, perhaps, was on public awareness. The case helped people understand that environmental advocacy doesn't justify illegal actions, and that proper procedures exist for a reason. Environmental groups now emphasize responsible resource sharing within legal frameworks. Looking back, the experience taught me valuable lessons about standing up for what's right, even when faced with someone trying to twist environmental concerns into justification for theft. It showed how one person's determination to document and challenge wrongdoing could lead to positive changes that benefit everyone. The charging station in my driveway, now a model of security and proper management, stands as a testament to how communities can support green initiatives while protecting individual rights. The new neighbors on both sides have installed their own charging equipment, following all the protocols established in the wake of Alex's scheme. As electric vehicles become increasingly common, the security measures and legal frameworks developed from this case continue to protect homeowners and support responsible resource sharing. What started as a simple dispute over unauthorized charging evolved into a catalyst for nationwide changes in how we approach EV infrastructure security. The final irony wasn't lost on anyone. Alex's attempts to profit from unauthorized charging access ultimately led to better protection for everyone's charging equipment. Her scheme, intended to exploit the growing adoption of electric vehicles, instead helped create the security standards that would prevent similar exploitation in the future. And that 10,000 fine? It went into a fund supporting legitimate community charging initiatives, turning money stolen through unauthorized access into resources for proper charging infrastructure. Sometimes justice has a way of coming full circle. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.